Hey man, it's nice to meet you. Thank you so much for the book and for taking a minute out for the show. I appreciate it.
Hey, it's a pleasure. It's great to meet you too, Joe.
So before we get into shallow stock, I want to begin our conversation with, we're in a new year. We survived this pandemic. How much of surviving that pandemic and going through it has sent waves that you still feel into today?
Yeah, I mean, it was a seismic event, right? People of our age just haven't lived through anything like that before. And I've got teenage children, so it had a big impact on all of our lives. So I think it feels like the world has got generally back to the same place, certainly in the UK, that we were beforehand. But some things have changed permanently. The whole working from home phenomenon and people checking out of work perhaps earlier than they would have done because they've had this life-changing event and recognize that you can carry on working till retirement, or you can retire a bit earlier and perhaps enjoy a bit of what you didn't know you were missing. So I think for me, much the same as it was beforehand, with a few tweaks. But of course, the pandemic gave us all a bit more spare time on occasion, and that's what led me to start writing a book.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the book. And before we do that, I want to ask you this.
Sure.
Other than the writing, let's say I put you in front of a bunch of grade school kids, third graders. It's career day, and one of the kids in the room wants to know what you do for a living. How do you answer them?
So I trained as an engineer back in the day at college. I got my degree in engineering, but then I decided that I wanted a career that was perhaps a bit more aligned to my some of my other motivators. So I went into business and been working in business, particularly technology and software and computers now for 25, 30 years. And it's been a great career. It's taken me all over the world. It's taken me to the States. It's taken me to Europe. Um, Learned a lot of things, met a lot of great people. And of course, you see a lot of influence of that in my writing. You write about what you know, and I know business.
So, what did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your vision for your life?
Oh, I wanted to be an airline pilot.
Okay.
When you see the shots of the glamorous, captains wearing the uniforms, going through the airports, travel the world, all that kind of stuff. It was difficult to train in the UK to be an airline pilot back in those days. A, it was
Yeah.
expensive,
Yeah.
and the only company that offered any kind of scholarship was British Airways, and they put a hold on recruiting pilots for a long time as the airline industry went through peaks and troughs.
Yeah.
Um, but looking back, I'm quite pleased that it didn't work out.
Yeah.
I've had a great career in something else, and whilst it might have been very glamorous and exclusive for a period of time, I think in reality, I quite like being in and around my family, and I would have missed them if I was away 6, 7 days a week.
Yeah, for sure. So,
How,
talk to me a
how
little bit
about you?
about,
What did you want to be when you grew up, Joe?
man, when I was a kid, I watched Chips and I thought I wanted to be a
Oh
cop.
wow,
And then
yeah,
I got older and saw the reality show Cops on Fox when I was in my teen years, and I was like, man, no, I'm good. It's like
yeah,
the fictionalized and real worlds
tough gig,
just didn't
right?
match up.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you go
So,
buy a big Harley anyway?
well, I should have, but I didn't. I was never really a motorcycle rider. I had a couple of moments when I was a kid, so I just figured I'm going to stay in an enclosed area with a seatbelt and ride it out. So, are you ride motorcycles?
I had one back in my 20s for 5 or 6 years. Never really loved it. You know how some people just fall in love with the whole idea of riding a bike and they just
Yeah,
can't do anything else.
sure.
I enjoyed it, but yeah, I bought my first house. I needed to pay to paint the hallway, so the bike had to go.
Yeah, I get it. I totally get it. So, talk to me a little bit about these foundational seeds of becoming a writer, getting into technology, getting into engineering. What were those seeds that were planted into you that have been harvested into who you are today?
Uh, well, I think the writing comes from a love of literature.
Yeah.
So I've always enjoyed reading fiction. And as I got old enough and grew into adulthood, I started diving into some of the 20th century, what are perceived as classics. So, the Sartres and the Hemingways. I fell in love with the work of people like James Clavell, who was big in the 80s and 90s. In fact, Disney have just released Shogun, a new dramatization of Shogun, which is a fantastic James Clavell book. Also read some quite philosophical stuff, whether that's touching on it lightly, like The Unbearable Lightness of Being from Milan Kundera, or something more hardcore philosophy, like Ayn Rand and her objectivist view of the world.
Yeah.
Um, so these things, stimulated thinking, and I'd always wanted to try my hand at writing a book. But it takes a lot of effort if you want to do it well anyway. I mean, perhaps we can come on and talk a bit later about how some innovation and technology like AI is making things a lot easier for writers these days.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do it the old way and to put a chunk of me and my thinking into characters and put them in situations where I could explore some of the joins in the world and put across my points of view, whilst giving an engaging read. Because no one wants to be, well, not many people want to be buried in a deeply philosophical book that takes a grind to get through. I wanted
Yeah.
to keep a plot nice and tight and make it exciting.
It's interesting you mentioned the whole AI angle. I was talking to someone yesterday and I'd mentioned the Michelle Obama book. And she said, I was reading it. I never really got through it because I knew a ghostwriter was writing it. And and it's kind of the same thing for other people. And it's a great point you bring up because it requires a lot of energy, a lot of focus, and a lot of time. And if you're juggling another career, it's a hard thing to do. So my question is, how did you find that balance, or what bridge did you cross that said, no matter what it takes, I'm going to write this book?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I started in lockdown, as I mentioned, when we all had a bit more spare time, um, and literally just started without much of an idea apart from a character name and a setting. I just started first paragraph, second paragraph, and carried on. And you know, it is a grind, and it's a lot of hard work. And I found that my particular style, I couldn't sit down and do 10 minutes here or 10 minutes there. I had to sit down for at least a couple of hours to sort of get in the rhythm and the mood, and really put myself in the situation and the characters to figure out what I wanted to say next.
Yeah.
So those blocks of time are pretty precious when you're working full time. You've got a family, you've got other commitments. So in the first 2.5 years, I think I wrote about 80 odd pages of the book.
Yeah.
Um, and then I had a great opportunity to go part time with the day job. So I grasped that with both hands. And I wrote the next 300 odd pages, 350 pages in a year and a half, which just shows the sort of difference you can achieve if you really want to focus on this. And I have great admiration for the writers who do this full time.
Yeah.
Even the famous ones like Stephen King sits down every day and writes 2,000 words no matter what. I think that's a fabulous discipline to have. Um, but I was determined to keep going because A, I wanted to see if I could write a full length novel and find out if it was any good, and B, as I say, I wanted to put across some of my thinking in written form, because hopefully my kids will read the book, people I know have read the book, and get a little bit of me and what I think as a result. And the AI thing is interesting because there's a lot of hand wringing in the publishing industry right now about the impact of AI and is it going to put writers out of jobs and all sorts. I mean, I've never read a book, and I don't think I ever would want to read a book because it's written by a machine.
Yeah.
I read a book because I want to connect with the author. I want to
Uh-huh.
understand what they think and how they develop their characters and what situations they put them in, and kind of a worldview accordingly. So I'm not too fearful personally, but then I'm not making a living from it. But
Yeah.
personally, I think the innovation is inevitable, and writers will have to cope with that.
But I think people are going to know that. Like, even with AI art, I'll fiddle around with it, but it's AI. It's not
Yeah,
manufactured by a human being. So maybe in some weird sense, this will raise our hackles as human beings to be like, all right, yeah, no, that's not going to do it. Or this is like real deal human stuff. Maybe it'll just make us more cognizant and extol the virtues of real art from human beings.
right. I think that's true. And it'll also force us as human beings to strive for the highest quality in art as well,
Yeah.
because high quality human art, to your point, will always surpass AI driven art, I think. um, but I could see a world here where dare I say it, lower quality literature is built by AI. And if you want to buy a dollar book from the airport to read on the flights, maybe it's okay to read something written by AI.
Yeah.
But if you want something a bit more testing, or in my case, there's some violence in shallow stock. AI currently is limited from writing that kind of thing for good reason.
Yeah.
And you're back to an author to really decide that that's what you want to happen to that character.
Yeah. So, when I was reading your book, I was thinking I've worked in company environments for a long time, corporate environments, and there was all these scenarios that was kind of rehashing in my mind. And I'm thinking, how many years did you watch all of these scenarios unfold and think, I'm going to write something one day? Was that ever something that was foreshadowing that you were thinking about early on, or did you just get a gust of inspiration and then everything just kind of came in and became a part of your narrative?
Yeah, I'm fortunate to say there's very little in the book that comes from real life experience.
Okay.
Um, it's genuinely all made up as a work of fiction,
Yeah.
which is probably a good thing given some of the things that go on. But you know, as I said, I wanted to write something that was engaging for the reader and exciting and dramatic, and therefore you have to put them in events which are realistic. But the reality of all those happening in the frame of that period of time in the novel
Yeah.
is quite unlikely in real life, But that's
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
the ability we have to sort of push the boundaries a bit. Um, so what I tried to do was construct a world which was realistic from a corporate sense, a bit like you do on. I mean, I've been told the book is quite similar to HBO's Succession, for example, from a number of facets, which I've never watched, ironically.
Yeah.
Um, but again, they create a very realistic, as I'm told, corporate world, and then have outlandish storylines going through the middle of it.
Yeah.
So Shallow Stock does that with the intent of both entertaining but also educating the reader a bit.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. Um, you got great reviews. What's been one of
Mm.
what was the first review you got, or what fan letter have you gotten that's really blown you away? I mean, because it's such a process, and when you finally finish it and you get that response, it has to be magical.
I've had some poor reviews as well, right? I mean, you can't please everyone all the time, for sure. On the poor side, I've had some people say that they detested the characters, they found them irresponsible and idiotic, and so on. Um, but each to their own taste. I think I've had a lot more positive reviews, which is great. Personally, that you've written something worthwhile and people have enjoyed.
Yeah.
Um, I think probably the most unexpected connection I've made was across Twitter or X. Got talking to a guy in California about Joni Mitchell of all things, and he came and had a look at my profile, found the book, said he liked some of the influences that I cited, like James Clavell and Milan Kundera. Bought a copy, with no prompting from me. Read it, loved it. We've become firm friends.
Wow.
Isn't the internet a fantastic thing?
Yeah, it totally is. So the thing about making great art is that during the process, as the creator, you come to revelations that maybe you didn't realize. What did you learn about yourself during this process that you didn't realize or that surprised you once you finished the project?
Um, I think I'm not sure anything that really surprised me or that I changed. I mean, there were certain things about the process that certainly surprised me. I mean, we talked about how much effort's involved. I mean, I'd have no idea starting that book in lockdown, it would take me 4 years. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a lot of time. And,
Yeah.
the book is reasonably long for a novel these days. It's about 125,000 words. But I must have written well over 1 million to sort of get back to that core edited version. Um, and I think I found also that there are some pieces of the text that just trip you up. I mean, I wasn't expecting to find some elements of writing harder than others,
Yeah.
but I love writing dialogue. It seems to flow. Maybe I should be a script writer rather than a novel writer.
Yeah.
The descriptive work I put a lot more effort into. I remember one paragraph where I'm describing the office of a mayor in the book, and it took me a day. And it must be 200 words. It took me a day to get
Yeah.
all the words I wanted to get in there in the right order,
Yeah.
elegantly.
Yeah.
And that's why it took so long. It felt like an incredibly long extrusion process, where you never know if you're going to get to the end until you got there.
Yeah.
And then going back and re-editing, I found was much more fun than actually the drafting process to begin with.
Interesting, because I would think editing would be kind of a laborious thing, once you've put it all out there. But
Mm.
yeah, that's interesting, you know.
I'm told there are two types of writers: those that love the drafting and those
Yeah.
that love the editing.
Uh-huh.
And of course, if you love the drafting but not the editing, you can pay someone to go and do that.
Yeah, right.
But
Yeah.
you can't do the other way around.
Yeah, you can't switch it up. That's for sure. So you had mentioned some literary heroes or some people that
Mm.
you admire, but overall, in both your life as a professional and your writing career, who who have you admired? Who's been a hero for you, an inspiration?
I think back in the from the writers of the 20th century, um, I mean, I'll go back to James Clavell. I mean, do you know much about James Clavell?
I do a little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, your viewers may not know, for example, that he was a an officer in the Australian Navy, was captured and imprisoned at Changi
Yeah.
in Singapore in the Second World War, and became very badly treated at the hands of the Japanese as a POW. Um, he then went on to become a writer, and initially started as a script writer in Hollywood, where, for example, he penned the script for The Fly with Jeff Goldblum,
Yeah. Yeah.
among other things. And then his wife challenged him to write a book, and he wrote the book King Rat, which is based on his experiences as a prisoner of war in Changi. And then from there, that spawned the whole Asian saga, as it's known, which is his 6 or 7 books, take you all the way from Shogun in 17th century Japan, all the way through to Whirlwind, which is about the fall of the Shah in Iran in 1979. And they are fabulous books, beautifully written, engrossing stories. But his affection for Far Eastern culture just shines off the page.
Yeah.
And for a man that was abused for several years as a prisoner of war, it's astonishing that he found that level of forgiveness, and writes so affectionately about his tormentors. You know, I think that's an
Yeah.
inspirational thing.
For sure. So how do you balance the writing and the career that you have as a professional, all of these things that you do? How do you balance that out? What gets you up every morning? What motivates you?
Um, I think at the moment, I'm in the midst of a second book, unrelated to the first. You know, rightly or wrongly, I don't really aspire to write a series of books, which I think commercially is the way to go these days. If you want to make a living from writing,
Yeah.
put yourself in a genre that sells well, whether that's murder mystery or sci-fi fantasy or rom-com. Um, Write a book with a number of characters, make them engaging, and then go write the sequel, and then the sequel, and so on, and then you grow a following that way.
Yeah.
At the moment, I don't really aspire to that.
Yeah.
So I'm writing for me and what motivates me, which predominantly is the exploration. I think Margaret Atwell, of the Handmaid's Tale fame,
Yeah.
she says that she likes to find the joins of society and explore the issues of society through those joins.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fascinating way of putting it. Right, you find the edge of a segment of society, and how does that interact with the next segment, and what makes it interesting to explore. I think that's
Yeah.
what really excites me. How did
So,
you find the book anyway? Did you enjoy it?
oh, I totally enjoyed it. Yeah, and it flowed very well. I think there was some surprising elements that went into it, but like I said, the thing about the thing about reading a story is as the reader, you start going into these chambers of what you know. And I knew company life, and I've known characters that have been, that have been on the other side of normal and kind of idiotic and doing crazy things. So it's like you start going into your personal chambers, but it was wonderful. It flowed well. Everything, it felt good. It felt right. Um, and the interesting thing is, are you going to do this in audiobook?
You know what? I've been thinking about it. So I've got it in hard copy formats and an ebook. I'd like to do an audiobook, but again, it's not traditionally published. It's self-published, right? So I have currently a fairly small audience,
Yeah.
which I'm trying desperately to grow, but
Yeah.
it takes time. And the investment to get an actor to read 125,000 words is significant, right? And also, who would I pick and what style would they have,
Huh?
and so on. So whilst I'm not averse to the investment, I'm not getting much demand for the audiobook just now.
I got you.
Um, and the alternative, of course, is to look at AI because AI voices these days are, very realistic. But I think, whilst real human narration is still, the prevalent form, I'd like to do that. I don't think I'd like to put the book through an AI voice just yet. I want it to have that human intonation and surprise that comes with having an AI, that comes with having a human at the other end.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I divulge a lot of books and I do audiobooks. That's kind of my format. So I was thinking about that too, voicings and how it would be, presented, and I think it would work really well in an audiobook. So I was just curious if that
No,
was
that's great. I mean, if you were going to position an actor, most fundamental choice, would you go for a male voice or a female voice for the book, and why?
I would toggle and I would toggle just because of the impact. And I've listened to enough audiobooks where I've heard dual narration where you do go between the male and the female or, whatever theme that you want to go with. And I think it just adds to it. I think it helps and aids in you to construct this world and make it feel more authentic. Because I think sometimes they'll use just one female or one male, and the woman's trying to sound like a man, or the man's trying to sound like a woman, and it's a little much, you know. But if you toggle them, it just kind of adds and enriches it. And if you're going to put all that work and effort and, capital into it, it's like you might as well go for the gold.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, I hadn't really considered that as an approach, so thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm curious of everything that you've done in your life up to this point, of all of the, especially professional, I mean, personal too. What are you ultimately the proudest of?
I mean, it's a pretty standard phrase, but my wife and I raising our children is probably the standout achievement.
Sure.
I guess raising children is a bit like writing a book. You just have no idea what you're letting yourself in
Uh,
for.
yeah.
Um, but you talk to any parent, and they'd never want to give them back, would they?
Yeah.
So that's been the standout achievement. And building a life around that we enjoy. The ability to find the time to pursue the things and the hobbies I love. So I've written a book. I play a bit of music, play with a few guys that I played with for 25 years. Love that as a diversion and a hobby. I think plenty left to do, Joe. That's
Yeah.
for sure. But
Absolutely.
but yeah, I mean, you get to a certain age in life and you realize that you're more than halfway through,
Yeah.
and it certainly calls you to attention a bit.
I'm starting to get those old guy thoughts, and it's not a fear, you know what I'm saying? It's just one of
Yeah.
those things where I'll stop myself and I'm like, wait, I'm 52. It's like
Yeah.
you just kind of hear the clock ticking a little bit louder, you know?
Well, you do, and I'm not far behind you. And when I catch myself saying things like, "Oh yeah, I've known that guy since 30 years," and it's
Yeah.
like you can see my 18-year-old's eyes just glaze over, and he's like, "You're so old."
That's right. That's right. Well, it's weird. Yesterday was kind of a magnanimous day of losing people. David Lynch and Bob Uecker passed on the same
Mm,
day. And I'm thinking to myself how many years I listened to Bob Uecker because I'm a baseball
right.
fan and
Okay.
listened to him call games. And I'm a huge fan of David Lynch. And I'm like,
Mm.
it's weird because you just think that, because I was thinking the other day, when's David Lynch going to make another film? Is he going to get back into film? And it's like, but it also kind of compresses the fact that, I'm getting old. These guys are getting old. Things happen in your old age because I think both of them had cancer, I believe. So there's just all of those factors. But
Yeah, I mean, I don't know Bobby Uecker. I mean, baseball's not big in the UK,
yeah,
but I mean, David Lynch. I was such a Twin Peaks fan back in the
yeah.
'90s. I mean, that series was just transformational in terms of what it did for TV.
Can you believe that the executives there were like, yeah, we're going to do this. Let's go for it. I mean,
Well, I mean, it was a fantastic leap of faith, and it was such a shame that it kind of cut off halfway through
I
season
know,
two.
I know.
But if you watch season one standalone up to the point where the murderer is revealed, I mean, that's the story.
Oh, it's unreal.
And the way he tells it, and the idiosyncrasies of the characters, and Carl McLaughlin cast as Agent Cooper is just genius.
Yeah.
Love it. So kooky.
And it was like, so you get this very serious Dune guy that comes in and becomes this quirky FBI. Yeah, it's just all of those
Yeah.
little twists. Then David Bowie was in the movie. Lyle Lovett was in the movie too. So there's these people, these real life musicians that already have this shroud of kind of mysterious
Yeah.
cool around them, and then they just become these characters that make sense in that world.
Yeah, and I think David Lynch and Bowie you could put in the same category, right? They're guys that were prepared to push the boundaries and push the limits.
Yeah,
And I mean, Bowie, just a phenomenal artist who was never happy with what he was doing now. He was
yeah.
always ready to try and do the next thing, from Stardust to the big white thin white Duke and into his rock days. I mean, um, those I think are the most interesting artists on the planet. The
Yeah.
ones that never carry on doing the same thing. They just transform themselves every 5 to 10 years into something completely different.
Speaking of the essence of artistry and the artist, if everyone out there has a perception of you, family, friends, fans, everyone you work with, but you run the show, what's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Uh, Give me a bit more on that. What are you looking for or thinking
Just,
about in
just,
particular?
just kind of, everybody has this perception of us. Our kids have a perception of us, our spouse, everybody that we work with, those that read your book and don't quite know you. And they all have these formed perceptions of who they think you are. But ultimately, is you living your life the driving standard? What is your perception of what you're putting out into the world?
Um, I think I try and, to the extent I can, live my life in the vein of the big religions, which is always do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? So I'm not a particular believer in terms of organized religion. But I think those basic tenets that underpin the world's great religions of Christianity and Islam and so on, they're there for a reason.
Yeah.
They enable humanity to cooperate and get on and thrive. You know, so I try and do my best to live to those kind of standards. It's not always possible, but uh, but I think people probably would at work describe me as pretty focused um, uh, and so on. People that know me outside of work probably describe me as a bit more fun, I suspect.
Yeah.
But I hope both sides of that come through in the book,
Yeah.
because you try and imbue some of those traits, I guess, in your characters, whether that's consciously or not.
So the new book, Shallow Stock, if anyone wants to pick up a copy or they want to reach out to you or they want to know about the next book that's coming out, any of the good business in your world, where do they go?
Yeah, so appreciate that, Joe. So I mean, the book's on Amazon, which I mean, again, people can think about Amazon and kind of criticize the giants of the industry, but hey, I mean, you place an order today, it's printed overnight, it's delivered to you tomorrow in paperback, hard copy. I mean, that's just a phenomenal service, right? So it's on Amazon, all the country sites around the world in local currency. I'm afraid it's only in English. I haven't decided to translate it just yet. But the website's shallowstock.com, and you can find D.R. Shores, at all the socials, Threads, Insta, X.
Right on. DR, this has been wonderful. Thank you, sir, for your time, for your story. Best of luck with the new book, and have a wonderful 2025.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Joe. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.